go ahead and start recording. There we go. All right. So just as a refresher, because I know I wasn't here on Monday, right, this project we're working on right now is talking about love. What is love? How do we define it? Why is it a big part of so many stories, books, movies, songs, etc., etc.? And what are the kind of tools that authors use to talk about love, to illustrate love? What are the symbols and the literary devices? So we're going to talk about all that stuff. We're going to see some examples of it in two short stories that we're going to read, and we're going to kind of get some background on the first one of those today. All right. So to get us started, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. This is the question I want us to think about to get us started for today, which is what kinds of sacrifices would you make for a person who mattered to you? All right. Think about this. I know it's a pretty broad question, so you can get as specific or as general as you want, but think about this, and I'd like you to take a few minutes here, two or three, and then put something in the chat. Okay. Yeah. What kinds of sacrifices would you make for a person who mattered to you? Think about this. Put your answer in the chat, please. Let me think. What kinds of sacrifices would you make for a person who mattered to you? You can think as big or as small as you want here with this. It could be, small sacrifices like, okay, I try not to waste as much water when I do the dishes because I know my partner is very, um, energy and environmentally conscious, or it could be something bigger. Like I would sacrifice time, money, maybe even my life for a person that I care a lot about. So think about it, take about another minute, and I'd like to see your answers coming into the chat here. All right, let's see. Have we come up with anything? Let's check the chat out here. Nothing in there yet. So let's try and get something in the chat for this question if we can. I'd like to see at least two different responses in here. Again, we're thinking about this question right here. What kinds of sacrifices would you make for a person who mattered to you? Are thinking about today. Hey, Ambria, welcome. You are joining us kind of just in time. We are just getting started here. This is the question we're thinking about as our kind of do now. All right. So think about this. Put your answers in the chat. All right. Let's take maybe another minute or two since we still don't have anything in the chat. I like to see at least two thoughts in there. So who has a thought on this? Who can put something in the chat for us, please? Again, thinking about this question down here. What kind of sacrifices would you make for a person who mattered to you? All right, what do we think? Let's check the chat again. Any thoughts on this in there now? We got a couple. Very good. Selima says changing things internally, that's wrong. So that's good. So maybe changing our own behavior. Risky ones put their life before mine. I like that one too, Ike. Yeah. So like I said, this could be as big or as small as you make it. So like Isaac is saying, sometimes it could mean, sacrificing our life for another person. Other times it could mean sacrificing something small, like maybe I change, like Steve said, something internally, like change my attitude, change a behavior. Lots of different ways to go about this, but all really good thoughts. Thank you guys for sharing. So keep that question in mind because that is what is kind of going to be the crux of the story that we're getting ready to read here, called The Gift of the Magi, which some of you may have heard of before, maybe you've even read before, I'm not sure, right? But this is a great story about love and sacrifice and all the things we are kind of talking about in this project. So we're going to meet two characters, Della and Jim, who have each other, but not much else. But it's Christmas, and they still want to buy the best gift for each other. So how much will each make? How much will each one give to make sure that the other will have a very Merry Christmas? That's what we're going to try to figure out here. Okay. So the big thing with the Gift of the Magi is it is a great example of situational irony. Okay. Situational irony occurs when our expectations are contradicted by reality. In other words, we believe one thing is going to happen, but something totally different occurs. All right. Can anybody think of, off the top of their head right now, before we look at one, can anybody think of an example of situational irony where you thought one thing was going to happen, but something totally different is what happens? Either that's happened to you or someone you know, or that you saw in a movie or a show that you read about somewhere, right? Can anybody think of an example of this? You can share in the chat or you can come off mute, whatever's easier. But is there an example of situational irony that comes to mind for anyone? Anyone who can think of an example of situational irony? A time where you expected one thing to happen, but something totally different happened instead. Anything like that we can think of, either that happened to you, that you saw in a movie somewhere, read about, heard about? Anybody think of one? While you're thinking of one, here is my example. This maybe help you guys out. I always think about the Titanic, right? The big ship that hit the iceberg. There's a big movie about it, right? When that ship was made, it was called the Unsinkable Ship. So you expect by the name that the ship is built to never ever sink. Nothing could go wrong. But in reality, what happens is they hit an iceberg and the ship breaks and sinks and a bunch of people die. So the expectation, right, that it's an unsinkable ship doesn't match the reality that in reality it hit an iceberg and dies or hits an iceberg and sinks. So those two things don't match up. So that's an example of situational irony. So can anybody think of another one before we move on here and look at one ourselves? Anything that comes to mind? Again, you can put it in the chat. You can come off mute, but don't be afraid if you can think of one to share it. Again, this is a two-way street, as we know. Gotta help me help you. All right, well, if we can't think of one, that's okay, because we're going to look at one right now. All right, so here is a short little passage. We're going to look at this passage and see if we can pull out the situational irony. All right, as we're reading, think about these two things. What do you expect to happen when a professional driver parks a car? And does Dave's situation match your expectations? So we'll read through this a little bit. Dave was thrilled. He just won his first victory as a professional race car driver. He'd been amazing on the track, reaching incredible speeds and carefully avoiding the various wrecks that had taken other drivers out of the race. He couldn't wait to tell his family about his triumph. He was reliving his masterful driving as he pulled into the driveway and hit the family car. So read through that one more time again, real quick. Again, thinking about these two things. What do we expect to happen when a professional driver parks a car? And is that what happens to Dave, or does something else happen instead? And that should give us an idea of where the situational irony is in this passage. So one more time, real quick. Dave was thrilled. He just won his first victory as a professional race car driver. He'd been amazing on the track, reaching incredible speeds and carefully avoiding the various wrecks that had taken other drivers out of the race. He couldn't wait to tell his family about his triumph. He was reliving his masterful driving as he pulled into the driveway and hit the family car. So, judging from that passage, where is the situational irony in there? What is ironic about that passage? And welcome, Denim. We are talking about situational irony when what we expect to happen doesn't match what actually happened, because we're about to read a short story where that is kind of uh, the the key in what happens in the story. So those of us who where is the irony in this short little passage here? You can answer in the chat or you can come off mute, but I'd like to hear from at least one of you. Okay. Where is the irony here? Okay. Dave is a professional race car driver. He's just won his first race. He's very excited about it. He's going to tell his family, and then as he pulls into the driveway, he hits the family car. Okay. So where's the situational irony here? What is ironic? And again, think about these two questions to help you figure it out. What do we expect to happen when a professional driver parks a car, and what actually happens? Does Dave's situation match those expectations? What do we think? Like I said, I'd like to hear from at least one person on this. You can answer in the chat. You can come off mute. Don't say anything in the chat quite yet. So what do we think? Let's take another maybe 30 seconds. Think about this. Where is the situational irony in this passage? What is the thing that doesn't match what we expect to happen? What do we think? Any thoughts? Where to find the irony in here? What is ironic about a professional race car driver hitting another car as he's parking his car? What do we think? Is that what we'd expect a professional race car driver to do? Or would we expect him to be really good at parking a car? What do you think? Who can help us out here in the chat or coming off mute? I know we got enough people out there. So have we all drifted back to sleep? Or are we just silent today? What do we think? Yeah, you're right, Denim. We wouldn't expect him to crash. Why would we not expect him to crash? What does he do for a living? What's his job? Yeah, he's a professional driver. Exactly. Very good job. So we would expect a professional driver to be good at driving and maneuvering and parking cars. But in reality, that's not what happens. In reality, he crashes his car. So maybe he's not so skilled. So it's ironic that the professional driver crashes his own car as he's parking it. Good job, Denham. Thank you. So that is what situational irony is all about, ladies and gents. When what we expect to happen based on the information doesn't match what happens in reality, and instead what happens in reality is almost the complete opposite. Really good job, Denham. Thank you. Any other final thoughts on that, on the situational irony? All right. So now that we kind of know that, again, can anybody think of, and I'll put this in the chat too, can anybody think of one more other example of situational irony? Right. A situation that you saw that happened to you, happened to somebody you know, that you saw in a movie, read about in a book, saw on a TV show, where there was some situational irony involved. Kind of like my Titanic example. How, they called it the unsinkable ship, but in reality, it hits an iceberg and sinks. Anybody else have one more example of a situation like that? All right. If not, that's fine. But if you can, as we go through here, if something pops into your head, don't be afraid to share it in the chat. All right. But the reason we're talking about this is because The Gift of the Magi, the story we're getting ready to read, is one of literature's most famous examples of situational irony. Okay. So as we read, consider what we expect to happen and what actually happens. All right. What is ironic about the situation? Just like how we wouldn't expect a professional driver to crash his car when he's parking it, what would we expect to happen in the story and what actually happens? Right. We can see here kind of a little preview. This is a passage from the story that says, "Now there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair." So we can see how those two possessions might play out into an ironic situation. Okay. The other thing we're going to talk about in this story is the descriptive imagery and the descriptive symbols and what they might mean. Right. And these details share information about character settings, events, um, and they bring stories to life. This is kind of what we mean in this project when we say, what are the tools that authors use to talk about and portray their feelings about love? So we can see from this passage here, the stuff underlined in red shows that the residents seem to take pride in their home. The stuff underlined in blue shows that the neighborhood may be a little bit neglected and run down. So we can see here in the passage, it says the little house sat on a patch of neatly clipped grass. So that's underlined in red because the grass is neatly clipped and kept up, punctuated by a lovingly tended rose bush. All right, not just a rose bush, a lovingly tended. So taking great pride in that. Right, its front walk freshly swept and bordered by petunias led to the crumbling sidewalk that separated the yard from the trash strewn gutter. So we can obviously see a difference here in the way they talk about their house and their yard and how kind of neatly it's kept, and the difference in the rest of the neighborhood. The sidewalk is crumbling, there's trash thrown all around the gutter, and so we can see um, that what's called juxtaposition there, when there's a huge difference in two things that kind of offset each other. All right, we're going to be looking at a lot of those details, a lot of those symbols in this story, and trying to pull out their meaning. All right, like this example where, okay, 60 cents of Della's $1.87 is in pennies. That could show us that, it's super difficult for her to save money because she has to collect 60 cents just in pennies to get up to that 187. So as we read here, as we read through, we're going to be kind of looking at different symbols, different details, and what their significance is, what they tell us about the characters, the story, all that kind of stuff. All right. Questions about any of that so far? All right. Well, what we're going to do now is try and start reading the story. All right. So, where you can find this to follow along. All right. If you are registered in Summit, which if you're not, please let me know and I can give you the Summit code. But make sure you get registered at some point today or tomorrow so you're able to work on this over the weekend since it will be on the progress report. But if you're registered on Summit for our class, Creative Writing, you want to find our project, What is Love? And then you should see checkpoint 1 assigned to you that says Reading Journal Gift of the Magi. And then if you scroll all the way down at the bottom, you'll see oh, excuse me, a link that says Gift of the Magi text. And if you click that link, it'll bring you to a page that looks like this. And this is where you can access the short story to read on your own when we're not in class. So if you want to click that link right now on Summit and have it open to follow along, if you work better that way, by all means, please do that. I'm going to be sharing my screen so you can follow along that way as well. Okay. And what we're going to do today is try to, let me get rid of this from last class. Try to work through the beginning of this checkpoint to give you guys an example of how it's going to be done, since this is what I'm going to be looking for to be done by Monday to have on the first progress report. Okay, so you will find this on Summit. It's checkpoint 1 right here, Reading Journal, Gift of the Magi. And then it looks like this. And checkpoint, very simple, very straightforward. All right, 2 parts to this checkpoint. First part, we are filling out this chart with some of these different symbols and details from the story, kind of like we saw um, in our PowerPoint example right here. All right. You have the symbol or the detail on this side. You want to tell me the meaning on this side. What is the significance of this symbol, this kind of detail? What does it tell us about the story, about the characters, about their feelings about towards each other, anything like that? All right. That's going to be the first part. We're going to try to do the first one of these today together to show you guys kind of how this is done. And then the second part of the checkpoint is you're basically just kind of mapping out the plot, figuring out, how this story is an example of situational irony. Okay. So you can see the first problem says Della doesn't have enough money to buy Jim a Christmas present. What's her solution? What does she choose to do? Then Same thing for Jim. He doesn't have enough money to buy her a Christmas present. So what is his solution? All right. Now, because of those two solutions, what is their new problem? And then finally, what is their new solution to that new problem? And you're going to fill all this out as you read. And then lastly, just give me one or two sentences telling me how is this an example of situational irony. Okay. Questions on the checkpoint: where to find it, how to do it, anything like that. If you got them, now it's time to ask them. All right. Well, what we're going to do with the time we have left is we're going to start reading the story. And as we're reading, we're going to be thinking about this first symbol in here, Jim's middle name, Dillingham, on the mailbox, and what that symbol might mean. Then we're going to stop and come back and fill out this box in the chart, which you can follow along with on yours if you have it pulled up on Summit, to give you guys an example of how you're going to continue doing that part of the checkpoint. And then this second part, pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Hey Zanelia, welcome in. Good to have you here. Better late than never. And before we start jumping into the checkpoint, let me just update my attendance. All right. Zanelia, if you're just joining us, we are getting ready to read our first short story for this project, The Gift of the Magi, which you will find on Summit under checkpoint 1. So if you're registered in Summit for this class, you can click on our project, What is Love? And then if you click on checkpoint 1 and scroll down to the bottom, you will see a link that says Gift of the Magi text. And that's where you're able to access the short story and pull that up to follow along. Okay. Let me make sure I got everybody else on here for my attendance. Okay. Right. So again, you can find that on Summit. Checkpoint 1's right here. Scroll down to the bottom. You'll see Gift of the Magi text. It'll look like this, right? And then we're going to be talking about some of the stuff. And if you click right here, it'll bring you to the checkpoint, some of the stuff on this chart to try and fill this out, or at least fill the first one out as an example. Okay. And again, as we're reading, keep in mind that whole idea, which we talked about a little bit before you joined, Zanelia, of situational irony. All right. When our expectations don't match what happens in reality. Right, so like I said, I'm going to be sharing my screen for today. So if you want to follow along that way, that's fine. But you can access the story on your own on Summit there at that link that I just showed you. Okay. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. So we can notice a couple words in there like parsimony, imputation, that we don't hear very often. All right, keep in mind this story was written in the early 1900s, 1910s, 20s. So we're going to see a lot of that kind of older vocabulary. But what that basically means is Della kind of like bargains really shrewdly with the butcher and the grocer and stuff like that. So she's able to save up this $1.87, and now it's Christmas Eve, and she's concerned that she doesn't have enough money to buy a present for Jim, as we saw in our preview. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl, so Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. First stage to the second, meaning first stage being sobs, second stage being sniffles. So what he's saying here is while she's crying, it's kind of a way the author is talking to the reader. While she's crying, let's describe their home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beg your description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the Menachancy squad. Again, some kind of crazy vocab here. Basically, he's just saying their house, it's not exactly kind of like, decrepit or where people who are in, pretty bad poverty would live, but it's kind of right on the line. In the vestibule below was a letterbox in which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. So this appertaining stuff just means on that same letterbox is a card with his name, Mr. James Dillingham Young. Right? So, right. Hey, Unique, welcome.
I'm sorry I'm late.
No worries, no worries. It is better late than never. So we have
And Ayana here with me too.
Hey Nyana, welcome. We have just started reading the first short story we're gonna read for this project. So I'm gonna continue on with that. And if you guys want to get caught up later, the recording of everything else we did today is gonna be up on the Yes Philly YouTube channel later this afternoon. Okay? All right. So again, to recap, we know Della only has $1.87 saved up to buy Jim a Christmas present. We know their house is kind of a little bit more on the cheaper or poorer side. And we can tell that by some of these things here, like letters won't fit into their letterbox. The buzzer for their apartment doesn't ring. But on the mailbox itself, we see his full name, Mr. James Dillingham Young. Now, if we remember from our checkpoint, which we can find, again, for those of you who just joined on Summit, if you're registered under Creative Writing Term 4 and then our project, What is Love? So if you're not registered, please make sure you get the code and do that ASAP, okay? But if we look at the checkpoint, which you can find right here, the first symbol in this chart that we're trying to fill out is Jim's middle name, Dillingham, on the mailbox. So everything we're doing here is you're looking at the symbol on this side and you're telling me, okay, what does this symbol mean? What's its significance? That's what we're putting on this side. So as we're reading through this section here, that's what we want to be thinking about, right? The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. So this word here, prosperity, what does that mean? If somebody is in a period of prosperity, what does that mean? What's happening with them? Are they doing well or are they doing poorly? Can anyone help us out here to find that? You can answer in the chat or come off mute. But if you're in a period of prosperity, how are you doing?
Poorly. That they're doing what?
They're definitely doing well, right? So they're probably making money, right? So they're off to a good start. So keep in mind here that little detail. It says the Dillingham, his middle name, was put on the mailbox during a time of prosperity where he's being paid $30 per week. So he's doing well. We can afford kind of all these letters to put on to the mailbox. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. So now we know that Della, whom we met up here at the top, is Jim's wife. So we'll stop there and we can go back to our chart, right? So we're trying to come up with, all right, what's the significance of Jim's middle name, Dillingham, being on the mailbox? And we know that when he was kind of making a little bit more money, they didn't think twice about putting it on the mailbox. But now that he's making less money, they're thinking about taking it down to just a D. So why do we think that is? Why do we think now that he's making less money, he's thinking about switching it from Dillingham to just D? Why might he be thinking about doing that? Anybody with any thoughts on that? Why might he want to go from his full name, Mr. James Dillingham Young, which sounds very proper, right? Why might he want to go from that to now just Mr. James D. Young on the mailbox, since he's making less money? What might his thought process be? What do you think? Again, you can answer in the chat or you can come off mute. I'll put the question in the chat as well.
I can't hear you.
All right, I will try to talk a little bit, louder. But also keep in mind, if you are somewhere where it's a little bit noisy, maybe see if you can find a quieter spot. But the question again was, now that James is making less money, why might he be thinking about taking his middle name on the mailbox down from Dillingham to just D? What might his thought process be there? And I just put that question in the chat as well. Right. Think about what we already know. If you're stumped on this, we already said, all right, if you're in a period of prosperity, it means you're doing well, you're making money. All right. So think about what having your full name on the mailbox, all right, might imply. Right. But now we know he is doing not so well. He's making less money, $10 less per week. Right. So why might he want to switch it and just put his middle initial instead of his whole name?
See you one more time.
I'm sorry, Unique. Can you say that? Can you say it again?
Can you say it one more time?
Oh, my fault. So one more time, we're asking, and again, if anybody has any other thoughts on this and you want to share them in the chat, I just put the question in there as well. But if he has his full name on the mailbox when they're doing well and making money, but now that he's making less money, he wants to take his middle name out and just put his middle initial. Why do we think he might want to do that? Why do we think he wants to change that all of a sudden now that he is making less money?
He might feel like ashamed.
Okay, I think you're definitely on something there. Yes, he might feel ashamed because what do we think, having your full name on the mailbox implies? Do you think that implies you have a lot of money or not a lot of money if you're able to put your full name on the mailbox like that?
A lot.
Yeah, I think so too. So now we know, kind of like you said, Saleem, now that he's not making as much money, maybe he feels a little bit ashamed. He feels like maybe they're not worthy of having his full name, or it costs too much to keep on there, or it gives off the wrong impression. So he wants to put it down to just D, and it's a little bit more modest because, and it even says that right here too, a modest and unassuming D. So I think that is a really good kind of analysis there. So now we can go back to our chart on our checkpoint here, and we can fill that in on this box. James' middle name, Dillingham in the mailbox. So what does this mean? We can say now Jim changing the name from Dillingham to just D implies that he feels ashamed to be making less money now and wants to live a little more modestly. Give off more of a modest impression. All right. So we can see, so this is all kind of a way to illustrate how their times have changed. Jim and Della have fallen on some hard times, and this is just one of the little details that shows that. All right, really good job, Selena. Thank you. And then as we continue reading, or as you continue reading, what you'll do here, since we're just about out of time, is continue to read and fill out this chart on this side. Okay, here's the symbol or the detail on this side. What does it mean? What's the significance on this side? And you can fill it out just like we did this one, right? So we can kind of wrap up there, ladies and gents, and that's where you can kind of pick it up. So you can continue reading. We stopped right here about, with the last paragraph to go on page 2. Okay. So again, you can access the story on Summit under checkpoint 1. If you click on checkpoint 1, scroll down, right to the bottom, you'll see it says Gift of the Magi text. That's where you can find the short story. And then you can continue reading and filling out the chart, and then, the kind of plot outline on the checkpoint. So I'm going to be looking for this to be done by Monday when we come back. So you have the whole weekend to do it. And the story, like you can see, is not super long. All right. So it shouldn't take you too long to get through. Okay. And then when we come back on Monday, we'll see kind of where everybody is with this, and we'll go from there. But I am going to be looking for this first thing Monday to go on to the first progress report for this term, which is coming up. It's going to come out next week. Okay. So questions on that, on where to find the checkpoint, what we're doing on the checkpoint, anything like that. If you do have questions, now is the time to ask them. Right, just a reminder that the class recording of today will be up on the YouTube channel in a little bit. So if you came in late, you can head there and watch the whole thing to kind of get caught up. And I will also be available in the Summit Lab this afternoon from 1 to 3. Remember, it's the same link you use to get to this.
This unique. I have to get the hotspot for my computer.
All right, I know you guys are working on that, so
I'm not the villain.
once you guys
I'm
get
the
that,
victim. I'm the victim.
so I can email you everything that's you can try to get caught up. You can also come, like I was just talking about, to the kind of office hours, like the labs in the afternoon. All right. So if you don't have your hotspot in time to get this done for Monday, that's okay, because I know you guys are kind of working on that, and I'll keep that in mind as I'm doing progress reports. But thank you for letting me know. All right. Any other questions, concerns? All right. Again, the link for lab is the same link for this class that you used to get here today. So don't be afraid to hit that up. All right. All right, ladies and gents, if you do have a question come up as you're working on this, shoot me.
Okay, bye, Mr. Todd.
What's up?
I said bye.
Oh, thanks, Lena. All right. So have a good weekend. Stay safe, and I will see everybody again on Monday. All right. Good job. Unique, did you have a question about something, or you're good? Okay, cool. All right, y'all. Stay safe. Have a good weekend, and remember to have this done for Monday. Okay. Thank you, guys.